earlier testing, earlier validation, and earlier integration. An issue is much cheaper and much easier to fix. The earlier you find it, we all know it doesn't really happen like that in reality, but we understand that that is kind of the holy grail. By 2035, the UK is likely to only be producing around 1.1 million vehicles in the UK. So actually looking outside of just UK OEMs and UK production, I think is an opportunity we need to think about. I wanted to start by setting the scene a little bit around, consumer needs that are changing. I think, as Jeremy alluded to, the perceived value in a car to the customer, pre-2000 was in the powertrain, so, the notes from the engine, suspension characteristics, or the refinement of the vehicle. Today, that perceived value is changing. We're wanting connectivity, functionality, and actually there was a 2024 report out from McKinsey that highlighted, more and more people are actually willing to switch brand allegiances for better connectivity from other vehicles. Personalization is also a really key differentiator for companies. Obviously, that extends just beyond the aesthetics of the vehicle. We're looking at, bundles, subscriptions, packages, and add-ons for the vehicle, but also enhanced safety features, blind spot sensors, real-time tyre alerts, smart dash cams. And looking forward to a future, I think Dave mentioned this, customer-centric experience is going to be, what everyone is after. And that's going to be wanting to be not only connected to your traffic, your navigation, your infotainment, but also vehicle control. I think one of Dave's slides was around pet looks, which I quite liked, and actually just trying to think, we're going to want to be completely, immersed into that sort of online world as well. I found out a term, impatient economy, when I was kind of putting these slides together, and I quite liked that. It was this expectation of constant updates, instantaneous, seamless user experience. We want everything to be up to date and constantly being updated. Hyper-personalization, adapting to a driver's preferences in real time, continuously learning from a driver's behaviour, using data analytics to understand what the customer needs are and for it to become intuitive over time. Expanding functionality, so after the car rolls off the line, actually continuously adding new features, ensuring that the capabilities of that vehicle are updated and the software goes beyond its initial functionality. And digital ecosystem integration, seamless integration into our smartphone and online life. I think one of the points that I thought was interesting from Jeremy around brand loyalty is actually kind of the research that I've looked at is suggesting brand loyalty is going down year on year, especially looking at sort of China, India, or the Southeast Asian market. Brand loyalty is actually at the lowest. Interestingly, in the UK, our brand loyalty is lower than most of continental Europe. I was actually at an event the other week, and there was a Chinese new entrant into the market, and they were pitching the UK as a really good market for them because actually affordability and the technology that people get on cars is a real big, strong seller. Regional requirements also different. Strong connectivity is essential when I look at, say, a Chinese market, and actually many of the features that Chinese OEMs put within their vehicle are standard compared to maybe what are additional extras from a Western or a premium OEM. Affordability and kind of the changing car ownership behaviour. Young consumers are, considering mobility as a service, so no longer kind of purchasing a car off the line. And vehicle retention. I like the term retained newness. So, the customer wishes to retain as much value for the vehicle as for resale. The job's never done, it's never finished. The older my vehicle gets, I still want to get software updates completely. But also from an OEM point of view, capturing, as that vehicle transitions through various customers, keeping that retained value and ensuring that you've still got continuous customer activation. From a software lens, what that means is we've gone from that 100,000 lines of code to currently 100 million lines of code, and actually that software complexity is increasing year on year by 10%. So I wanted to talk around a report that has been released by the APC that was completed by AESIN. So I've just put the QR code there if anyone's interested. And what this was looking at is looking at the powertrain software trends that are coming over across the next decade. It's no surprise that software-defined vehicles was identified as the #1 trend, continuously optimizing the vehicle, and also for the OEM having unparalleled information around what that vehicle's doing. Cybersecurity was highlighted as the second most important trend, as Jeremy sort of discussed, and also centralised architecture, so moving away from that distributed architecture to a centralised and zonal architecture. Across the various domains, so powertrain, ADAS, body, chassis, clearly the powertrain is very majorly affected by all of these upcoming software trends. What I thought was quite interesting was when I was reading through the report, actually there is no one right way to do this. Different OEMs have got different approaches to this depending on their goals, their alliance and collaborations. So we look at, say, like an in-house clean sheet approach. Tesla's kind of the typical one here, and it's very typical of new market entrants. OEMs have independent full stack control. They're avoiding tier 1 suppliers and going to work directly with tier 2 suppliers and develop those subsystems. While Chinese OEMs also typically adopt that clean sheet approach, they are kind of various transformation paths depending on their scale and R&D strength. Strategic collaboration, that's looking at setting up knowledge and developing a deeper tie with a tier 1. So, for example, Stellantis partnering with Qualcomm. A collaborative approach, so Rivian and VW is kind of the one that springs to mind that I'm sure everyone's seen in the news, and where VW is aiming to leverage Rivian's expertise in software technology to accelerate their own development. And then hybrid, which is focusing on market breakthroughs in key areas. And then finally, the fast track, key acquisitions and partnerships. So Hyundai, I'm sure I've not listened to that advert where I haven't meant to change how you say Hyundai, acquired 42Dot in 2022. However, kind of similar to Jeremy's slide here, it's a challenge. And actually, over 20% of recalls are based on software, and numerous launch delays across a variety of OEMs that are all choosing different tracks to get into market. It's just really damn tough. So I kind of wanted to just dive into maybe some of the reasons around that. The legacy systems and infrastructure from OEMs. So the R&D development timeline. I found a paper online, and the names now escape my head, but it highlighted that new entrants to the markets typically spend about 1/3 of the development time that a traditional OEM happens. Legacy architecture, many OEMs will rely on legacy systems designed for hardware-centric vehicles, and also kind of utilising AI as well. So potentially being more open to, say, automatically generating product documentation, completing quality checks, etc. I know a few speakers have spoken about, changing of the platform. Obviously, the holy grail here is having one software platform across all of your vehicles. I think the challenge for especially larger OEMs where they have a breadth of applications is how do you spec those requirements? If you're designing for a pickup truck and a sports car and a family car, for example, they all have a widely different set of requirements. But if you look at, say, some of the new market entrants, they will typically focus on one particular area. And then finally, in terms of the supply chain, OEMs are wanting to shift left up that supply chain. I think that's what Dave was alluding to around strengthening collaborations between OEMs and the upstream suppliers is critical. So that was one of the things I wanted to pull out from this, and hopefully it comes out quite strongly in the report as well, is actually that the supply chain dynamics are shifting. OEMs are motivated to move up that supply chain. They're looking at different vertical integration strategies, and also as part of that, ensuring supply chain resilience is key. We can all remember the chip crisis, and interestingly, I'm keeping my eye on the news because Mr. Trump keeps threatening, to introduce tariffs around semiconductors, which will clearly have a massive knock-on impact to the industry. Tier 1 suppliers are moving down to this tier 0.5, so this is a more closely integrated relationship with the OEM. So suppliers are becoming strategic partners and having that tighter cooperation with the OEM. Tier hopping chip suppliers. So again, I think on Dave's slide, there was one of the boxes on one of the slides talking about semiconductor selection. OEMs are wanting to kind of almost talk to those tier 3s and actually understand exactly what semiconductors are going into their vehicles. That's a great insight that might not have been available previously if you were just buying that black box from a tier 1. And also new entrants. So for me, I was thinking about, the recent announcement around Foxconn joint venture with Mitsubishi, where, they're going to be designing and building cars in Taiwan. So it's not only crossover from automotive out, but also new entrants into the automotive market as well. One of the things and one of the challenges I think this introduces as well is that shift left. We all know the benefits of shifting left in that development process: earlier testing, earlier validation, and earlier integration. An issue is much cheaper and much easier to fix the earlier you find it. We all know it doesn't really happen like that in reality, but we understand that that is kind of the holy grail. Obviously, I've just spoken about the fact that we're wanting to shift further up the supply chain. So we've now got more people defining, ensuring we've got the right requirements defined early on, again, as Jeremy was alluding to, actually is introducing a lot more complexity into this process. The other sort of issue for me is looking at this kind of consolidation across multiple domains. So as Angela mentioned, I'm a mechanical engineer. I understand the V-cycle very well. That makes a lot of sense to me. You've then got that kind of interlaying with the DevOps cycle, which are clearly running at completely different speeds. So actually trying to align your mechanical hardware, your electrical and electronic architecture, and also your software development is all trying to happen at the same time. So having that well-defined workflows and tools and responsibilities is key. I quite like the quote I find around the fact that actually, for me, it's everything always fails on an interface. So actually, it's that integration and interfaces that actually is the really key bit to define. So thinking around the UK supply chain. So the UK has, a fantastic breadth of SMEs, typically around in that tier 2 area. Tier 1s, and this is again something that's pulled out in the report. Previously we had, fantastic tier 1s in the UK, but now a lot of the tier 1s are representing overseas suppliers, and actually it's more local market support here in the UK. So the question really for me is, with this shake-up in the traditional supply chain approach, actually, is there some opportunity for new partnerships and collaboration? And I've been really pleased to hear, the word collaboration come out a lot from all of our speakers' presentation, because for me, I think that is possibly one of the opportunities for the UK. Semiconductors players now can actually start talking with OEMs and working with them. And I also appreciate a lot of the conversations today has been on Pascal. I understand why, but also, I think for me, it's also not forgetting about the wider automotive landscape here in the UK. We've got some fantastic commercial vehicle and off-highway suppliers as well. So it's actually just remembering, what is the size of the prize. In terms of the UK, clearly, it's not without its challenge. And the AESIN research, highlighted two of the biggest issues. One of them was around the commercialisation plan. The UK is fantastic at R&D and innovation, but actually taking that product and scaling it up into a high volume or potentially low volume component, that is a real challenge. And also resourcing. The average UK powertrain engineer, is typically on a lot lower salary than you'd maybe get offered if you went into software in, say, pharmaceuticals or finance or technical. Fundamentally, the automotive industry is maybe not attractive to a software engineer because we're actually maybe not offering sort of comparative wages. And also finding the right skills are challenging. So some of the conversations I've had actually is around, it's not only just finding software engineers, it's finding software engineers who understand the automotive development process and actually how that works. It's not, it is different slightly to how you would say do smartphone development work. So I wanted to pull out market opportunity. I feel like that was a little bit negative. Obviously this is a massive market opportunity. The EU has got, I think it says £90 billion worth of opportunity in 2030 in the report. And it's looking, the automotive software market is expected to grow from £16 billion in 2020 up to £40 billion in 2030. There's a fantastic opportunity in this area. The other thing that I think will be quite interesting is to see the results from the Slido quiz, because the report highlighted that actually the UK has got a real strength in integration. And depending on how that's looked at, I think that's potentially a key opportunity for here in the UK. Other UK strengths for me are around innovation and collaboration. We've got an envious innovation environment, access to collaborative R&D funding for UK organisations to innovate together. We've got a high skill base with good levels of further education here in the UK, and also a can-do mentality in terms of getting things done. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is also that the APC does have a report coming out in the next couple of weeks that is looking at the AI skills gap and workforce confidence in AI and how that might impact the automotive industry going forward. And it highlights kind of the need for targeted training and development on AI skills to ensure that the automotive engineers who are working in the space, have the right training and development to support that process. So I kind of wanted to end on a question of what does the future look like for the UK and where is the value add? I was discussing with a colleague around, where should this end up? So, the UK exports around £3 billion worth of engines last year. It's a fantastic market for the UK. Clearly, that market is not going to exist forever. Is there opportunities for, software or hardware or, from any of the topics that were chosen in the Slido? Could that potentially change that? In terms of UK domestic production, bit of a shameless plug for our demand reports that we put out every quarter. But by 2035, the UK is likely to only be producing around 1.1 million vehicles in the UK. So actually looking outside of just UK OEMs and UK production, I think is an opportunity we need to think about. But also, how can UK companies take advantage of that changing supply chain landscape? Is there opportunities for semiconductors, manufacturers, tier twos to actually get more involved with this? And also, what unique innovation could the UK offer with cross-sector innovations? So thank you for listening. I've also put on here a QR code for our knowledge base. So this is where we have our insights, foresights, quarterly demand reports, etc., that are all free to download if anyone is interested. I'm about at the conference today, so if anyone wants to talk to me about any of the funding opportunities with APC or Zenzik, then feel free to grab me. But thank you very much.